my goal after coming back was to kind of review a lot of the material that you guys and ideas that you guys had come up with while I was away. Um, and there had already been some kind of summaries and key takeaways written. Like, for example, Vivian, you had written one on particularly around like spatial location being projected and hippocampus and stuff like that. But it was specifically kind of the meetings, the November 12th and 19th. There was a lot of discussion around actions and bringing those into behaviors. And I thought there was loads of interesting ideas there, and I just wanted to make sure I kind of understood those. And then, so the plan is to kind of summarize them back to you, my understanding, and some comments, and then maybe some additional brainstorming on other ideas. Um, but yeah, and so there's kind of a write up, which I know you only got kind of just before this, and it's morning there. So but yeah, if you want to look at it later, and then there's some Excalibur stuff, but that's more for the kind of speculative stuff. But yeah, I'll just get into it. But yeah, overall, it was really fun and exciting. I don't know if anyone else ever has this, but like sometimes I imagine what it would be like to see into the future and see like what ideas do we come up with that now, like if you knew them, would seem maybe obvious or just really clear, but which we don't have right now. Um, and of course, we can't. But I feel like I got to do that a little bit by going into a time capsule for 4 weeks and then appearing on the other side. And you guys had come up with lots of great ideas. So it was fun kind of going through this. Um, but yeah. And yeah, apologies. I don't have kind of some nice diagrams for this part, but I just thought I'll kind of focus in and we can slowly kind of work through it. But yeah, so kind of starting at the top, I thought this was yeah, a powerful kind of point. This kind of really understanding that a behavior and a behavior column, a state is a kind of view or a snapshot or whatever you want to call it of an evolving process. So the kind of equivalent of what we have been calling sometimes like a keyframe in a morphology column um, still exists. It's still embracing this idea that all columns are doing the same thing. But of course, because the input features are changing, then this kind of behavioral state describes something that's changing. So, for example, a hinge's opening, it's not in the open state. Um, and I thought this was already really important because it sort of helps these states become actions in some sense, or how the way you often use the word action. Really what we mean by that is often at the cortical level, um, an evolving state. Um, and yeah, I think a lot of these were ones you brought up, Jeff, on the 12th. Um,
Yeah, I can just add some flavor to some of this. I mean,
yeah,
that was a weird. It's still a little weird idea to me. The state being this like the hinge is opening, but that's what it seemed like we're forced to think of it that way because that's the thing that you have to associate with causality, right? It's like it just we kind of backed into it. We're kind of forced to think of it that way, and
yeah,
so I like it too. Well, it's still a little weird to think about. I'm still not sure I have 100% clarity on it,
yeah,
but it's
yeah. And like there's weird things like what period of time does that cover? Or, you know,
right,
what's kind of yeah, and things like that. But,
right.
but
So
yeah,
I guess I'm saying I don't think we're quite done with it, but I think
right,
it's the right idea,
right.
in the right direction.
And then yeah, and then I think you also one of the big ideas that kind of led into this states projecting widely is that a change in a world that precipitates a change in an object, so kind of a behavior that causes another behavior, can essentially be arbitrary. And so learning needs to be able to support this. We can't, and this is where I think your thinking started moving to kind of, we basically need to look beyond just single columns. Because I think up until then, we had been focused a lot on kind of single column learning a complex behavior, and maybe at some point it kind of communicates with another column. Um, but yeah, and then so once you have these ideas, then the kind of conclusion is that states need to project widely. But because we're learning causal relations, somehow the kind of neuroanatomy, which yeah, recap soon. Somehow that needs to capture this kind of causal sequence where one state predicts another. Um, and in general, the discussion's been around behavioral states. So, for example, kind of the switch being flipped. So this is a process, not an end state. Predicts the light switching on. Again, a process, not an end state. Or kind of worded more simply, state A becoming active is predictive of state B becoming active. And I highlight this word predictive because one of the things I'll talk about later is kind of predictive versus driving, and where it feels like there might be a kind of a distinction there. Um, and then this is maybe an older idea, but this kind of importance of attending to locations, to changes in the world, and that kind of narrow attentional window feeds directly into this because, of course, anything could be changing. And there's, immense complexity out in the world, objects all around us. So in order to actually efficiently learn these causal relations, it's very important that we serially attend and kind of restrict spatially that attention to kind of what's actually changing. And so, yeah, so this was the example of you kind of notice the switch being flipped, and then you notice the light turning on. Um, One kind of discussion that was touched on briefly, but I thought would be interesting to talk a little bit more about. So, static states, so for example, the switch is in an on position or the light is on, can be correlated, but these are more challenging to learn a clear causal relationship for. Um, yeah, and I guess I was just thinking, I mean, this is how I kind of worded it. I think there was some discussion that maybe we don't learn causal relations for these, but it feels to me like we would still naturally learn some amount. It's just a lot harder because um, when applying serial attention, there's nothing to restrict us kind of accidentally learning the incorrect causation. So you can see the light is on, and then you can look at the switch, and you might that which is flipped up, and so by that you could kind of come to believe that the light being on is what's causing the switch to be flipped up. But I think what will naturally happen is when you're doing this, you notice the switch being flipped, and then you notice the light turning on. When you're attending to the switch being flipped, at that moment that the switch flips up, you're also going to recognize the morphology model of the flipped switch. And then you're going to turn to the light. You're going to see it turn on, but you're also then going to have the kind of morphology model of the light being on. Um, and so the way attention is applied because of changes in the world, you're naturally going to often attend in the correct kind of temporal causation order. And so, and if so that we don't kind of try and say that morphology columns are somehow different, naturally there will be some degree of this kind of same projection, I think.
It
Um,
does seem, it seems like there's I agree with that. But it's also like there's so many things in the world that we could correlate that way, right? The switch being up
right,
could be correlated with my faucet being to the right or my refrigerator door being closed. I mean,
right,
so I kind of felt like reading through this, I was like, I was thinking maybe that it's like maybe we have to learn the causal actions first. Like, oh, we have to learn that the switch goes up, there's a light going on. And after doing that, we might be able to make these this kind of causal relationship. But it seems like so many things in the world. Every state could be associated. Every morphology state could be associated with any morphology state. So it seems like you'd have to observe a change sometime, and
right.
before you would try to learn like, oh, the state of the light being on is associated with the switch being up, type of thing.
Yeah, yeah, right. Yeah, one thing, I mean, it kind of reminds me of voting, which is a connection I'll talk more about later, but because voting's kind of similar in that, like, when you're learning objects, you could incorrectly learn that everything else around an object is also part of that object, and it's all just one giant object. Um, and so clearly there's some mechanism to kind of, in an unsupervised manner, kind of parse out objects through things like movement and statistical decoupling of when you see them and stuff like that. Um, so even if it's just like a slow kind of background learning that's like, oh, these things tend to happen together. I wonder if they are causally
Yeah,
associated.
but even that
But
word,
but
these things
then
happen together, implies that there was a change of state in those two things. right,
Right.
right. I mean, there's a let's see, there's a doorknob on my door and there's a chair at the table. And, unless those are two things that they happen together,
Right.
but unless I see, I don't know, something like the door move and the chair move, I don't think I'd ever start learning that the doorknob is associated
Right.
with the chair.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I'm going to go back saying, there still need to be some. We would learn those things, right? It's in some sense, but only
Yeah.
after we've learned some causal action. It seems to be that's the case to me.
No, I think that's a good point.
I wrote a little note there. You could say it seems right, but
Oh
then
yeah.
main case for actions cause actions, and I wrote that only like 20 minutes ago. But now I'm thinking like, oh, it seems right, but I think you will need to have this thing. You have to have some.
Yeah.
Um, you've made this link through behavioral states, and um, I
Yeah,
don't
I
know.
guess the only other way you could learn a causal relationship would be by like explicit experimentation. Like
Right.
some things you can't see a transition happening, so you do like controlled experiments basically, seeing, okay, what if I put the chair here now? Will this change?
Yeah, but still, that's
Um,
a change, right? That's still involving the behavioral models. It's not purely morphology. You have to observe a change someplace.
Yeah, and I guess humans are generally
yeah.
bad. Like we need science and society to often piece apart ones that are true kind of morphology, like the association between lung cancer and smoking. You know, those are both on such long time scales, and you just kind of know, okay, someone's smoking, and some people have lung cancer,
But
and they're
even
kind of
but even
correlated.
even that's a behavior, right? Because some people smoke and some people don't smoke. I mean, I don't know. It's like um, I'm trying to
Yeah,
think. All I'm thinking is
which are pure.
there's
Yeah,
almost an infinite number of morphology states in the world that could be associated with each other, and you can't. The brain can't spend any time thinking
yes.
about
So
it.
I guess what I think a true morphology state just being kind of causally associated with another morphology state, like one always implies the other. To me, that could almost just be reframed as voting. Like that's
All
basically
right,
just saying that
right,
okay,
right,
there's a nose, that means there's
right.
an eye, kind of, um,
But
and
yeah,
it's
maybe it's
there's no
like voting,
change happening. It just always implies the other one.
but voting then they'd both have to be part of the same object in some sense, right? Which is right. I mean, voting only works when you have an object ID voting with another object ID. Um, anyway, I don't know if it's worth spending too much time on. It's like voting,
Yeah,
but anyway,
yeah. And then yeah, just related, yeah, that maybe a more likely one or kind of relevant is that yeah, a behavior state can predict a morphology state. And again, this seems like it'd just be a natural consequence of the connectivity that's set up where, a switch being flipped predicts the switch in the flipped on morphological state. Um, and I think
um,
that's desirable that we would,
right.
uh,
But I wrote my little note there too. I said it seems like you would have had to observed the change in the morphology state once before. That is, it still seems like you've had to observe behavioral state changes on both sides. Um,
um, but sorry, this is the change, this is the state of the switch. Um,
it seems that we would learn a behavioral state predicts a morphology state. So I assume that meant like the switch is going up, it predicts some morphology someplace. Um, switch being
yeah,
flipped
I
up
guess
predicts.
yeah,
Well, your comment there, switch being flipped up predicts switched and flipped on morphological state. That was made my head spin because I think we still associate the behavior of the switch with the morphological model of the switch somehow, right? Because we know that this,
right.
and so that would be more of a, um, That's we haven't walked through that, but we still have to. It's like a switch. The switch behavior is a child object of the physical switch, and somehow we have to. Those have to be to go together. Um, those are those are linked in a different way in some sense.
Okay, yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I guess I was thinking that it could be linked this way as well, in that kind of
all
one
right,
implies the other.
but
But
we haven't abandoned the idea that the physical switch or any physical object, a morphological object, can have associated at various locations behaviors. So, like, the stapler has
right,
behaviors and so on at different points. So there was already a separate relationship there between the switch being flipped and the switch morphological state.
right.
Um, those are not like two things in different parts of the world. I assume we're
Um,
still using that idea that that behavioral models can be associated with a parent morphological model, just like a parent-child
right,
relationship.
Yeah, so
right,
like basically using the same mechanism as we use for compositional objects, and that way,
Right,
if we're on a
right.
location on a morphology, we can predict which behavior it would have there. And if we transition through a behavior sequence, we can predict what morphology to to expect, which is I
yeah,
think the case that Niels is describing, that we went through the flipping switch behavior, and then we predict how the flip of the switch now looks like.
Right.
yeah, yeah. And
I think that,
it feels like it could be a little like how composition and voting can both happen across levels of hierarchy. It feels to me like both these things could maybe be happening just because those connections exist. And so, um,
yeah. But I do think the
but
idea
anyway,
that
yeah,
it's a hierarchical, compositional. If behavior models and morphological models can both be treated identically as childs, that would be the best. I don't know if that's gonna
right,
work out, but that would be nice.
right,
It's a good
rather
place
than
to
something
start.
special. Um, okay, yeah, but then anyways, these are just yeah some subtle, I guess, edge case types of stuff. Um, and then yeah, anatomically, you guys propose that the state projection might take place via projections from L3 to L1 in other columns. There, it would synapse on the apical dendrites of receiving L3 neurons. Um, and yeah, it's just more about anatomy later. Um, And then one kind of neat thing, which I think more came up on Slack later, Jeffrey, or something, but you can kind of have a chain of arbitrary complexity that can kind of link such behavioral events together. Um, and then this more relates to something I think you suggested, Vivian, which this can then be used to kind of bring in action specialized regions, e.g., motor or language cortex. So without a chain, just like a short one, two links, for example, speaking the word Alexa, you get light switches on, but you can also imagine, hand does flicking motion. So this is like a specific maybe representation in motor cortex. Flicking motion is maybe a more generic one, and this could maybe be activated by other things as well. Um, Switch is flipped, light switches on. Um, and
I was thinking more along that. This seems right, but I was also thinking more along the lines of, like a multi-step action. You talked about in the past, Niels, about making coffee, and you have to do this thing, and then you have to do this thing, and you have to do this thing,
right.
all to the end goal of making coffee. So I was thinking more about sort of,
But I guess I was thinking even the light switching on, even though it's
right,
kind of almost as simple as we can imagine, it still requires multi-action. But I agree, like,
right,
yeah, I feel
right.
like this would
I
apply
know,
to
but although
the
that
coffee example.
I think I said I agree with this here, right? But I'm just saying it's
Right,
also we need to make sure we don't make sure our thinking is broad enough to encompass all this stuff.
right.
Um, right.
But yeah,
I
one thing
think
in general I've liked about the L3 projection thing is I was always worried about goal states being kind of restricted by hierarchy. That felt too, it just felt too restrictive somehow.
right.
That, it's like, well, why would it be the case that the columns will have the necessary hierarchical kind of stacking for it to be top-down connections that take care of this. So it
Right.
feels, yeah, it feels much more right that it's just a broad lateral connection, and then it's just strengthened where it needs to be. Um,
Right. One thing you
Although,
did
yeah,
mention there, but
oh, go ahead.
um, yeah, just one thing you did mention there, there's a lot of evidence of the timing, timing dependent plasticity type of learning in L1, and even also sort of
right.
reinforcement learning type mechanisms like the L1 could be, first of all, that that it only is going to learn if it's in the right order, right? And
Yeah,
one has to occur for the other, and then the idea that there's this sort of reinforcement learning type mechanisms that seem to occur in layer one, where you can go through a series of events, a series of actions, and only if the final one is achieved are all the intermediate actions reinforced.
right.
Um, so that would be, that is literature's out there. So that seems to be useful too in this case.
And yeah, I
Yeah,
think
and I
it
guess the other
doesn't
I was thinking,
necessarily. Oh,
go ahead.
I was, I was just going to say, I think it doesn't necessarily need to come from layer three. It could also come from like layer six, for example, learning causality of when you're at a specific location in some object's reference frame, which,
Right.
yeah, I guess maybe relates a bit to, I think you wrote me about like what's actually the evidence of these layer three to layer one connections that
I didn't
like
understand your comment,
most.
Vivian. It seems like layer three is that if that is the action state, isn't that the one you'd want to correlate with another action state?
Yeah, but I mean, in some cases, you might want to correlate a specific location in that reference frame. So, I mean, there's a lot more evidence, I think, for the layer six to layer one connections. So I'm just wondering if, like,
I wonder if that's true. Is that really true? I wonder about that. I remember a paper once. Maybe I could try to find it. I don't know. I'm so bad at finding papers, but um, it was making the summary paper of all the different connections between layer two, three, and one, and so on. And it seemed like one big mess. It seemed like, oh, layer three cells predict the layer three cells. Layer three cells predict the layer four cells. Layer three cells predict the layer one. And it was like it was driving me crazy. Like, but that would make sense in this case. So I'm wondering if there is anatomical evidence for that, in that.
yeah, no, I
I don't
mean,
know.
I think there is some evidence for that connection as well. I'm just saying you could learn causal relationships between anything that arrives in layer one. Like, it could be coming from layer five or layer six or layer three,
Mm,
layer two. You should be
yeah,
able to learn a causal relationship with any of these.
right. But I'm not sure what it
Yeah,
would
no,
mean
I
to
agree
learn
because I
what
feel
would
like
learn a causal
causal.
relationship.
I feel like causal goes kind of beyond behaviors. Again, kind of like voting. Like it's sort of bidirectional causation that like if you have an eye on a face, then you'll have a nose, and if you have a nose, you'll have an eye. Like it just means like one implies the other.
But that's
Um,
that's purely that's purely compositional objects, right? That's just an object that has components to it. Um, that can be done in a single column. We
sure,
really we're
but
trying to do
I
this.
guess what
We're
I'm
trying to
thinking is
say
just
again is the door has a doorknob and the my car has a steering wheel. Steering wheel. We don't want that's not those aren't related anyway, right?
yeah. I guess where it comes from is just because like STDP, spike time dependent plasticity, like that
Yeah,
is actually already a causal learning rule.
right.
Uh, and so even if the L1 apical dendrites aren't doing what we want, or like aren't sufficient for kind of giving some special temporal properties, actually STDP should already be sufficient, I think.
Well, then, but
It's
then if you take that, then if you just take that in its broadest interpretation, that would suggest that I have to have two changes: a change A followed by change B, and there just by saying they're changes implies it's a behavioral state, um, right? It's
What do you mean? Sorry? And then, so yeah, I agree. If you just have state A changing, state B changing, so one becomes active, then the other one becomes active, STDP would reinforce that
right.
association.
But it wouldn't have such association if A was B changed and A was constant. Or that's my interpretation. Or uh,
Right. Or yeah, it would be less reinforced. Like the strongest reinforcement would be when one follows immediately after the other.
right, a change in
Right.
one follows a change in the other.
Yeah.
Um,
But I guess that's what I'm thinking. Like, I'm not sure it's this importance of kind of causation. I'm not sure it's restricted actually to behavior. Like even just like a location, it's kind of like an if-then relationship or something. It's like if you're at this location, then you should be seeing this feature.
but that's not
And so
causal.
like again, we want STDP.
That's just our model of an object, right? Models of objects say, oh, if I know where I'm in the kitchen, I
Yeah,
see a
I'm
light
not saying that's
here.
behavior,
Yeah,
but
okay.
I'm saying like the importance of one thing implying in another is still important.
I guess I'm saying it's within any particular reference frame that's handled by our object modeling system. So we're talking now between different objects and between different reference frames. And I'm not convinced it's important, or that it would happen. Um, or maybe what it would imply is that then I would expand my model of the object to include all those things that are causally related, you know.
I guess it's at
Uh,
least I think it's important in brains because there's so much activity going on. Like you want to know that, okay, yeah, the activity in L4 predicts the activity in L6, or the activity in L6 predicts the activity in L4. But
right. But
the random activity that happens to be happening in somewhere else in the column, um, if that isn't consistently following on from the other thing, then that shouldn't be kind of strengthened. Um,
right. I guess maybe we should have a picture of this. It would help. But I think I thought what we're talking about is trying to learn the two objects are causally associated, or just, but these objects are not in the same reference frame.
right.
Um, and I'm arguing that if they're morphological models, that we don't want to learn that because there's too many things in the world like that. But if it really was true that object A and object B are always present at the same time, then I would try to incorporate them into a larger object model that says, oh, the chairs and the table are always in the room, the room at the same time. Therefore, they're part of the room, and therefore they have a relationship in terms of the room as reference frame. Where to me, the whole exercise here is you nailed it up front, which is that the behaviors. If I have a behavior changing state someplace and a changing state someplace else, that's the thing that has to be broadcast. Those are the two things that, like, whoa, they occurred one right after the other. They may be causally related. I should learn that causal relationship. Um, I think we're
Yeah.
saying the same things over and over again, but I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah. Yeah.
sure
I
if we're,
think I
we're
think
making
yeah,
any
maybe it's
progress.
it also at the end of the day it's just getting down maybe into the neurobiology and like but um but yeah, I agree with you. Definitely, the behavior is more important. I guess. Yeah, and I've already said it, so I don't think I need to talk about more about it. But it just feels like voting might be something kind of similar, and that like yeah, an example you just described, like yeah, I agree. You'd also learn like a model at the higher level, but since both those columns in the lower level have models of the objects, they would learn to associate with each other. And again, that's kind of the voting connection. Um,
Uh, yeah,
but
I
yeah,
guess I mean, I don't know. Uh,
But anyways, today's not meant to be talking about voting, so
okay.
let's stop.
Yeah.
Um,
Question. We say there's too many morphological states to make causal connections with, but wouldn't attention help with that, like limiting the number of morphological states that we can make
Well, they
connections?
limit what you can attend to one at a time, right? I mean, you have to do that. But there's 100 things within my view right now, and the 100 objects that are movable, and um, I guess The only, if I look at all the things in my view, I'm looking at a couple of rooms in my house. All these different things. The house is cluttered. There's all these things all over the place. If I'm going to learn their relationship, I would say, oh, they're all part of the same room. So this lamp is over here and the chair is over there. They're all part of the reference frame of the room. But I wouldn't associate any one of those things with, the state in another room, like the car in the garage or something like that. I mean, it just, we have a method already for learning the if you want to call it causal relationships of morphological objects. It's our modeling system where you have a common reference frame and you place all the objects in the reference frame. And that's the method for doing that. That's how I learned that the chairs all they come together because they're all part of the same room.
Yeah, so this isn't changing any techniques. So I guess what I'm literally suggesting is that the voting connections, rather than being L3 to L3, because I think those might be doing something else, it's L3 to L1. So it's doing the
Yeah.
exact same thing we've always said voting does. It's predicting something else.
If L3 is if L3 is a state of a behavioral model, I'm 100% agreement. If it's a state of morphological model, I'm still not on board with that. There's too many possible connections that way. I can't even begin to think about them. Even if I just attend them one at a time, I don't want to learn all these things.
But we learn to vote, and that's through serial attention and kind of statistical decoupling. You look at an object, several columns, all kind of light up, seeing the same thing. Obviously, the first time you do that, that could be spurious, but then you spend a lot of time looking at things.
Well,
And
let's be careful. Voting occurs when multiple columns are observing the same object. And so they're all within the same physical space. Like I'll be touching the cup, I'll be looking at the cup. Even if I hear a sound, the sound will be from the same physical location of the sight and the touch. So in voting, what we're saying is a whole bunch of columns are trying to model something within a particular volume, and I might have different modalities, and so they can vote. I can vote like between my fingers that are touching the cup, between my hands or different fingers, or from the sight and the touch. Any sensor model that within that volume that's observing the same object can vote. But then they're all they're all observing the same object. They're all in the same physical space. Whereas the behavioral model we're talking about is things that are not in the same physical space. I have to tend to two different things in different orders. There's like I have to tend to one space where the switch is, and I have to tend to another space where the light is. And it's not like there's a volume between the switch and the light that I'm considering. There isn't one volume of space.
But I guess
that
in practice, both of them tend to involve different columns, and therefore
but
require
the difference is in one
connections.
case, voting as we've used voting today, up to today, it's always been everybody's observing the same object, and therefore they can vote. And that object is in the same physical space, but it's always the same object. So voting is like it's a way of saying the object I'm observing is the same as the object you're observing. So, but in this case with behaviors, we're not doing that. And in this case of associating two morphology objects that are not the same object, it just happen to be existing at the same time, but they're different objects. It seems fundamentally different to me.
Okay. Yeah, I feel like that's the same as in the same space. If one object is on top, next to another, you might incorrectly associate these two together.
Right, you would.
But that
You
becomes
might.
correct. That becomes correct if this is kind of glued to it and you always see them together. And
Right.
so over time, you would learn that.
Right, but I wouldn't learn that the coffee cup on my counter is, in the same space as the chair in my living room, even though I can see them both right now. I look in the kitchen, I see the coffee cup, and I look in the living room, I see the chair. They're not in that same space. They're not part of the same object. They're just too remote. I'm not sure this is a terribly fruitful exercise. It's not the most important thing we have to do. We have to figure out causal behaviors. We already have
Right.
good models. We have good modeling system for learning models of objects, somewhat pretty good for learning models of behaviors. We haven't really tested that yet. And now we have a causal system for learning behaviors associated with behaviors. Um, let's celebrate our
Yeah,
successes.
right. Yeah, I guess it relates a little bit to the inverse model, which I'll talk about later, but yeah, it's
Mm,
not key.
right.
Um, so anyways, yeah, so going back to this chain of arbitrary complexity, you can have this sequence of action or behaviors. Um, yeah, I was just thinking that kind of mirror neurons might be kind of useful for rapidly learning with this kind of framework because you can imagine that a child watching someone do something, they'd see something and then see this and then see this, but potentially when they are observing this, the same part in their motor cortex that's active when they are doing that themselves could become active, and then that could enable kind of learning this simply through observation without necessarily having to do it yourself. Um,
Mm. I think so. You see, I made a comment here about mirror neurons. I never liked them. Um,
Um,
and
yeah,
um,
I'm not implying they're tied to people.
well, I guess what
Um,
is it then? I mean, if to me, it's more like take the example of the light switch. It seems to me the important thing is I learned the light switch goes up, and that's associated with the light turning on. Now, yes, I could say, oh, I see that Niels did it using his nose. Therefore, I should use my nose, something like that. But I don't have to. I could use my finger. I could use the chopstick. I mean,
that is generally what kids do. Like they will follow the same sequence that they've observed. I think there's even a famous study with some chimpanzees that did better on this, but the kids will kind of follow the sequence that they saw the adult do.
well, right, the
Um,
sequence,
I,
but
I thought
go
it's the
ahead.
other way around, that if children see an adult like struggle opening a closet with their arm, they'll come and open it with their hand like a different way, that they don't
I guess that's a
necessarily
different
do the
experiment.
same.
The one I'm thinking about is like how to interact with this particular box to get some candy to come out. And so the adult demonstrating the behavior does this like complex series of actions where they kind of like poke a stick in and all this stuff. But
Well,
it,
okay,
it basically, yeah,
but poking a stick in is, I mean, that's a requirement that you can't get around that. I mean, I can't stick my head in there or use my elbow in the hole. I think it just struck me clearly we don't learn that the way to turn light switches on is to use your index finger. And I know immediately that I could use another finger or anything really. I know that I may not do it typically, but I know I can. It's in
yeah. I
and
mean,
if I if
I feel like that's kind of a question of abstraction. So yeah, so then okay, if we have a representation of flicking motion, um, in order to like that is somehow kind of a motor process that you are flicking something.
well, let's think about it. I'm trying to decompose this. So imagine I just learned take the body out of the picture. I learned that the light switch moves up and the light turns on. I don't have to necessarily learn. Uh, I now have a separate question that says, how do I gotta move the light switch up? And I can
Right.
divorce that completely from the learning of the light switch and the light. Um, it's I don't have to associate it with any particular body part or anything. It's just like, oh, now I could say, how is it that I'm going to use my body to move that light switch or move? How can I move that light switch? I have to put something into that location at that point and move it, and I can use different parts of my body to do that. I guess I'm just, it would be really nice, and I think it is true that we can separate these things out. That
I
you don't
agree. I
have
guess
to.
I just feel like this is maybe a complementary way to efficiently learn a valid sequence. It's yeah, you're not constrained to that, but basically it's just the point that by observing a particular motion, you can associate that with potential kind of behaviors that you have internal to your body, not just behaviors that you are observing in the world. That you can map a behavior that you see, like someone else flipping, to a behavior you know about your own body doing a flicking motion. And then
Right,
that just enables
right.
this kind of rapid imitation learning.
Well, I guess it's an interesting question because you can do both ways. Obviously, I can do it with, Vivian pointed out, I don't have to do it the same way you did it. Um, and and yet maybe I do learn it quicker if I do exactly what you do. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, because
I
from
think
what I remember
the
from that
general.
study, it was really young children were kind of constrained to this. They would just follow the sequence that they observed, and then it was only above a certain age. Because basically, the experiment was the adult had like a box kind of in front of them on a desk. They kind of did a series of actions, including like poking a stick in and stuff like that. And then eventually, this candy dropped out, and then they took the candy. And then they did the same experiment, but with a transparent box. And with a transparent box, you see that the stick poking in does nothing. It just hits like a wall. And then it's only like the second or third step that the adult does that actually moves the candy and gets it through. And so older children kind of understood that the poking of the stick was spurious and skipped that step. But younger children just kind of went through the whole sequence um, and didn't
Yeah,
have
I think
that
that
kind of
that
physics
tells us.
understanding.
Well, I think that it tells us something different. I mean, um, there are a lot of things that we do where we learn to do them inefficiently, and we don't know that the more efficient way to do them until someone explains it to us. And I can give lots of examples of that. So I think that's just tells you more about what a child can learn about observing that internal mechanism and whether they understand it. Because an adult would do the same thing. I would stick the stick in, and I would do all the same
No,
things
no,
if
but
that's what
you wouldn't once you see the clear box.
Yeah,
right.
it
But
seems
that's
like
a
that's
that
it's maybe a bit of a complex example because it involves lots of behaviors chained together instead of just be observing one behavior. So
Yeah,
the kind of stuff that I've read before was more about pretty young children already being able to infer intentions instead of just mirroring actions. So even if they see an adult do something and fail at it, they can still see the intention that they had and do it themselves in the easier way, like opening something or putting
right.
something into a box. Like if I try to put something in a box, balancing it on a spoon and it falls down, and a child could come and pick it up and put it in the box with their hand. Like they understand it at a pretty young age.
Yeah,
But
right.
yeah, I just did a quick Google and I haven't had a chance to read through it yet, but just from the abstract, it seems like understanding intentions that mirror neurons are also implied in that. So maybe it's a related thing.
I
I
Right.
think.
think
Yeah, go
um,
ahead.
I think Jeff, you already proposed how rapid learning could happen in hippocampus by silent synapses, right? Like I think if I
Yeah,
remember
right,
correctly, like a few weeks ago. I mean, I don't
right.
I guess mirror neurons probably use silent synapses or long-term potentiation, LTPs. So
Well, I think there's a separate things. Like one is if something learns rapidly, like
right.
one shot learning, you have to have a mechanism for that.
Yeah.
And the only mechanism I know about is silent synapses.
Yeah.
Um, so these things could be happening in hippocampal complex, where you learn them rapidly, or they could be in the neocortex proper if they were, um, more permanent memories.
Yeah.
It seems like a bit of orthogonal direction. I would like to suggest, I think the way we were approaching this, again, I have a bias against mirror neurons. I actually don't think they're really anything. I think they're just the reflections of what models do. Um, and, and so people get all excited about it. But I think we have basic mechanisms in place to do everything. Even if mirror neurons are true, and even if we model other people's behaviors, I don't think we need that to go forward with Monty. We have,
I
if we
agree.
can say, okay, objects have behaviors, we can associate causal between those behaviors. We now have to be able to say, how can I affect that behavior using my body? Whether I have to observe someone else doing it or make it up myself, but it's pretty, the way I've been thinking about it, if I need to move something or if I need to actually physically interact with something in the world, um, we can describe that in very abstract terms. Like I need to actually take something and have it move in this direction in this location in space. And then we can, what part of your body does that, or if you even have a body or anything else, it's sort of an abstraction from that. We don't really have to deal with that right now. So we could, even if mirror neurons are a real thing and we model people's other behaviors or intents or all this stuff, I don't think we need to go do that to have, we don't have
Right.
to include that
Yeah,
in
I
the
mean, the
Monty
only reason I
and make
use
a useful system.
the only reason I use the term mirror neurons was because it's a it's a term used in the literature. But I agree, there's
I
nothing kind of
know.
magical about them. Like I just mean basically the neurons that represent a particular behavior, but
Well,
just
that's
that, but but
those
just
neurons
that, yeah, but just that
those
you would
neurons would be in our
recognize
behavioral
that,
models. Our
right? But just
behavioral
that you
models
would
would have
recognize
those
that
neurons.
just that you would recognize that when you observe someone else doing it, but it would activate the behavior that you yourself can execute.
Well, think
So
of it.
it's different from the light switching on because it's that kind of transition from the external world to something that you can actually modify.
I'm not sure it's really different than the light switch turning on.
I mean, it's not
It,
totally different, but I guess I just feel like there's a subtle distinction there.
I mean, often like mirror neurons are associated with something like, oh, someone's shaking a hand or something like that. I remember I read that once. Well, that's just an action. It's like any other action. It's like the stapler opening. It's just an action. And so, yes, you even said the words yourself. It's a mirror neuron is a representation of an action. And so our behavioral models would represent that. They would have mirror neurons in them, even though I wouldn't call them mirror neurons. They're just the idea of mirror neurons is that our whole system of Monty is in the thousand brains theory. It says that there are neurons that represent things in the world, that are the morphological things or behavioral things, and therefore mirror neurons fit into that. I don't think we should get hung up on this issue. Personally, I'd rather not bring in mirror neurons, even though it's in the literature. There's stuff in the literature which is just confusing and wrong. We don't always want to adopt it. Um, I don't think we need
Yeah,
it.
I'm happy to avoid the term.
Yeah, I don't think we need it. We can just say there's behaviors. We associate behavior with behaviors. Some of those behaviors are associated with morphological objects. Those morphological objects could be people. They could be light switches, and there's nothing special about any of it. It's just we have to learn these, and then we can. In the end, we have to achieve to have a Monty-based robot do something. They obviously have to say, how do I put an action at this location in this direction, or how do I have to create an action in an abstract sense, and I can use different body parts for that. And
Yeah,
that's
I
what
guess
we would do.
I'm just wondering whether that abstraction would come later. But yeah, maybe not.
I don't know. I
Like
think
it feels hard to expect that.
I don't know. It feels
But
like it
maybe.
feels very simple to me. It feels pretty basic.
I mean, I'd prefer it. I prefer the abstraction. Like that's obviously the cleaner way to do it. I'm just thinking kind of practically, yeah, to
I
get
would
Monty
think
to
a
learn. Like
child early
it's more
on.
intuitive to think about how it would recognize a particular action and be like, oh, okay, that person picked it up. I have a picking up thing. I'm
But
gonna
think of it this
say
way:
that.
I pick it up with my right hand. Does a child feel I have to pick it up their right hand? I doubt it. And then the example where Vivian just gave, an adult picked up with a spoon. The child says, "I don't have to do that.
Right,
I'm just picking it up."
right.
So I would, I think we can make arguments both sides of this, but I think the cleaner way, and I think it's going to, my prediction will work out really well if we just take the abstract version of this and assume that's in behavior all the time. And I'm not saying that sometimes we don't learn to mimic exactly the procedures that someone else does. Um,
Yeah.
uh, yeah,
No,
it's interesting
that's fair.
when you learn to play piano. One of the hardest things to do if when you're really just starting out is use the correct fingers on each note. And there are often correct fingers to use. Like, you could play the same notes by putting your hand down, and often the correct sequence is awkward. Like you have to use your thumb and your middle finger and your pinky in this situation. And that's because, the music sometimes, in order to be able to play the next note, you had to have your fingers in the right position. So I remember first learning playing piano was like, I think about what notes to press, but I would often get the wrong fingers on the notes. So it would work. I would play the right
Yeah,
notes,
so
but it
you're
wouldn't be the
focusing more on the
correct one.
abstract solution, right?
Right. I'm focusing on these keys have to go down. Not like, oh, I watched the teacher tell me, it's thumb, middle finger, pinky. It was like, no, these are the
Or you have
keys.
to force yourself to slowly do it that way.
Right. You have to really train yourself to do the right hand placement because you're thinking about the keys that have to be pressed. You're not thinking about what fingers have to be moved. So there, it's like that abstraction is built in right there. It's very hard to overcome, actually.
Right.
You don't watch the teacher's fingers, you watch the notes and the keys. Anyway, we can come up with examples on both sides, I'm sure. But I don't think it's a good discussion. But I still don't want to. I don't want to get hung up on this. I want to make sure we drive to conclusion on our behavioral tasks. And
Right.
I think bringing in mirror neurons and these kind of things could just slow us down. They might be
Right.
true. I just think they'll slow us down.
Yeah. And then the kind of final thing is that which is maybe the big one, is that we need to kind of learn the reversed form of the causal link, such that we can activate the behavioral state necessary to achieve a desired state. So if A predicts B, we want to learn that B becoming active requires A to become active.
Or like the goal state of B becoming active, right? It's like I mean, the way we thought, this is all the words are right. I'm just saying, we were thinking like, oh, we want the light to come on. So B is the light coming on. So we're imagining that.
Right.
And then we go backwards to say, oh, the switch has to go up.
Right.
It's just other words on the same sentence.
Right. Yeah. And so my understanding was that was kind of where the discussion got. There wasn't too much on kind of how the anatomy might play, or maybe there was some. But anyways, I had some thoughts on that, which I can show diagrammatically. So in this kind of setup, we have behavior columns 1 and 2. We have the feed forward input is changing features at locations.
Can we say, is 1 like the light switch and 2 is the light?
Yes.
Which is the order?
Yeah,
okay.
Sorry.
Okay.
Oh yeah, I meant to put in images. And I
No, it's all right. I just want to make sure that it was in that temple order. One goes and then 2 goes. Okay. Yeah, it's good enough.
Okay. But just for posterity, whatever, it's not too confusing. This is kind of the projection we've talked about before. This kind of predictive association where you have, which you guys suggested. So this kind of causal association, the state predicts another state. You can ignore this since we've already talked about this enough, but this is where I was saying earlier, maybe it's related to voting as well. But the main one for the purpose of this discussion is this state can predict this other state if we get the stuff that's already been discussed before, where you look at the object at the switch as it's changing, then you look at the light as it's changing, and so forth. And then but what I'm going to suggest is maybe L3 lateral connections, and maybe these could be different from the normal voting connections in various ways. It could be coming from different neurons. It could be coming, all kinds of stuff. But if we just say there is some sort of L3 lateral connection, but it's more horizontal, so it's going to be basal input, and so it can drive activity. It can actually, so whereas this is predictive, this is going to apical dendrites and is more put in an L3 neuron in a predictive state. This is actually going to, if sufficiently active, cause a receiving neuron to potentially spike. And then there's an inhibitory connection, which will become relevant for kind of imagination, that kind of gates this activity. So those are kind of connections to then kind of step through that. So again, this is the one that's already been kind of discussed. You have the switch flipping at time 0, the light illuminating at type 1. This is where you get this predictive association. It's causal. It's reinforced because of this precise temporal order of the active switch, then light becoming active. And then this inhibitory connection, as long as there's feed forward input, this is active. And so that's kind of gating this connection. And so that's just silent. But yeah, I think in one of the presentations, Rami, you were asking about kind of the apical dendrites, if they could be relevant for learning the inverse one. And that got me thinking about this concept of backpropagating action potentials, where this is very different from backpropagation in deep neural networks, but basically when an axon spikes, that electrical signal also passes backwards along all the dendritic branches of that neuron. And there's some discussion about whether this has kind of consequences for learning. But I was thinking it could be
the general term in neuroscience is just back action potential.
okay.
You don't need the word propagation.
Okay,
Just
maybe
back
that's the
action
distinction
potential.
here. Back action potential. Thanks. But whether that could then prime the same L3 neurons to receive this kind of lateral input and have so from here you have this action going out that we already had. This is the projection of the behavioral state. There's also a back action potential, and that could potentially prime these L3 neurons to.
But the back action potential. Okay, it's already confusing here. What the
Okay.
term back action potential means is that when the neuron spikes, there's a dendritic spike that goes up the apical dendrite. It goes up out the basal dendrites. The blue arrow you're showing there is not a back action potential. It's going the wrong way. So maybe you meant something different than the back action potential.
Maybe the way I'm showing it isn't clear. What that was meant to represent is, exactly that, kind of spreading throughout the neuron, as in like not going the direction of the axon. The axon
Right,
is
but the arrow is showing the opposite. The arrow is showing it's going down.
okay. Sorry, for me, what I was trying to show was that it was just going back along the channel, as in actually what? Yeah.
But it's not going from layer 1 to layer 3 cell. It would be going from the layer 3 cell to up to layer 1.
Yes, I agree.
Okay.
Yeah, and throughout the apical, the basal dendrites in layer 3.
Right. Okay. All right. So the blue arrow's got the wrong direction on it. So I just ignore that. Is that?
Yeah, or just yeah. Okay, that could have maybe been clear. It's meant to basically be spreading. Yeah,
It's like if the layer 3 cell becomes active, then all the dendrites know about it a moment later.
Right.
So this
Exactly.
spike generates.
That's what.
Okay.
Right.
So
maybe just showing the layer 3 cell in blue or something would be clear. I can change that later when my
that basic mechanism. Oops! Look at that. Oh my goodness.
Oh, has our card expired or something?
That's not
Maybe
good.
maybe the AI has taken over the world and doesn't want us to know how it works. This is the end, the beginning of the end.
Yeah, what's happening on Twitter?
Should I share?
We just go one by one until we're all down.
5 minutes.
Right.
Yeah, maybe we should take a screenshot of that and put it in a Google
then there
Doc.
were none.
Yeah, maybe Rami, take a quick screenshot and put it in the Google Doc. I think that's actually a good idea before you also lose access.
It's terrible.
Yeah, and Rami, did you manage to get a screenshot of the other diagrams?
I'll do that now.
Thank you.
Oh no, I'm also denied.
Oh my God, they're coming for all of us. Quick.
Well, I was the first one. I just couldn't get in to begin with. So, but I think that was a different problem.
Maybe you triggered some
caused
kind of spam filter or something, and now
I don't know.
That happened to me on WhatsApp. It was really scary. I was just messaging a handyman asking if he'd help with some stuff and kind of asking for a quote, and I got flagged as a spam bot. which just boggles
Wow.
my mind, and blocked for 24 hours, which just boggles my mind because like I get spam messages all the time on WhatsApp that are so obviously spam. It's like, oh, you should invest in this cryptocurrency or whatever. So it's like, how can the spam bot, the spam filters miss those and think that my yeah, anyways.
Sorry, Niels. I'll stop sending you those crypto things on WhatsApp. I realize you're probably not interested, so
And you always do it under these new account names as well,
yeah.
just
Well, I
to
like to mix it
just
up.
keep me guessing.
Yeah.
It's just
Oh,
secretly all
boy.
from Scott. That'd be
Nice.
amazing.
Thanks, Remy.
Yeah, no worries.
I'm just getting
yeah.
like basically the Excalibur like shapes beach ball. I don't know if you guys are getting that. It's just infinite waves.
Yeah, exactly. That are like jumping on top of each other.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting now. Okay, so blue, this imagine this kind of spreading throughout this L3 neuron and just basically priming it.
So what happened? I flipped the switch?
Yeah, so you flip the switch, that sent a signal broadly that basically that behavioral state was active, and those neurons went into this kind of special state from the back action potential.
Okay. All right.
And then you attend to the light illuminating. This behavioral state becomes active. That temporal order of this becoming active after that is what is important for learning the forward connection. But then maybe there's a reverse connection that's learned through the basic priming of these neurons, and then some projection here. And so it's the reverse causality, like the temporal, this connection cannot be learned unless this precedes this. So it's still kind of, there's still a importance of the temporal order, but it's the reverse. So that's one, I guess, key thing. The other thing is that the reason I'm suggesting basal input is because this is going to be a driving input. And then what that means is that kind of to initiate a goal, I guess this has to happen at some point, kind of at the top. But imagine that these L3 neurons become active. So this is kind of an imagined behavior state or a desired goal state. So if this L3 input is to these basal dendrites and is sufficiently strong, even in the absence of input here, it could activate the behavioral state here. So lights illuminating could actually activate switch flipping. And what I've suggested is just like as a way, like functionally, how does that happen? What does imagined mean? How is that different? If you just had like a simple inhibitory circuit, kind of inhibitory gating, basically if there's no feed forward input, then that's imagined. And if there's no feed forward input, then you have no gating of this outward. And then if this is active, then it's basically saying, okay, this is what I want. What did I learn was needed to get me into this?
But what if you have feed forward input, but you now want to be in a different state?
If you have feed forward input, but you want to be
Like-
in a different state.
Like you see the switch and off, but now you want it to be on. You're still getting sensory input, but
yeah,
you
maybe
have a
maybe
feed
not absent. Yeah, maybe mismatch. I don't know. Between this and the imagined behavior. Yeah, it's a fair point. Yeah, some sort of kind of mismatch, I guess, there. Which I guess mismatch could be absent feed forward input, or it could be the wrong feed forward input. It's kind of like off object. Yeah, and I guess you'd almost always have some sort of input here, whether it's black or like you've closed your eyes or something. It's generally hard, I guess, to totally shut off the sensory. Yeah.
Yeah, it seems more like it would be a difference between actual state and goal state in layer 3. But I guess it could be a difference between actual feature and predicted feature in layer 4.
Yeah, like as in maybe you have two state representations here.
Yeah.
I guess, yeah, I was just trying to reuse the same neurons so that learning this reverse thing is easier, but yeah, you might be right that it's maybe cleaner to separate them out. But yeah, but then basically then that would allow us to kind of you could do this with one link, or you could do this with multiple links, because I think one thing I feel with the imagined behavior state is like it's important, probably it feels like it's important that those neurons are actually spiking, but somehow they're spiking despite us not having the kind of necessary input associated with that state. And so something kind of needs to drive this to actually spike. And so, yeah, so that's just my thinking for why it could be.
Are you done with this idea yet, or is there more slides on this
Yeah,
particular
I
idea?
guess the last one is just kind of bottoming out. So as in like recruiting the motor system. So I guess kind of the same thing here, and I think you guys already talked about this, but then also maybe this kind of similar principle could also be applied for a behavioral column to actually recruit the motor column. So this is like the kind of first the general lateral L3 to L1 connection, but here it's L5 to L1. So this is a predictive association. So you've learned through observation that an action tends to predict a behavior state. This column output some action. It didn't know what was going to happen, but then it observed some behavior state, and then it learns to predict that. But then in the reverse direction, it's driving activity when it's, again, not gated. So it's kind of imagined, it's a goal behavior. And so that's actually, that behavioral state is now actually going to drive whatever you learned down here to activate subcortical systems.
I'm confused of what the overall goal of this slide.
This one?
What is the problem you're solving here?
This one is trying to, yeah, just work through, I guess, again, the kind of anatomy of what would, how would you actually learn the association between a particular behavior state and the achieving a particular behavior state and
Okay,
the output
so,
action. So it's
okay,
the
so-
same kind of, you
All right,
learned
so earlier I
yeah.
argued that this could be divorced from the particular column. I said we can abstract this where right, where you have
Yeah.
you have a desire to have a switch move, but that column doesn't need to know anything about
Right. So
who's
maybe
gonna
switch
do it.
flipping is a bad example, but we know that all columns have motor projections. So clearly those are
Right,
doing something.
But you know, it's interesting because we recently just, when we started talking about this pericolliculus, and the projections from the visual system to pericolliculus, what we learned was that the pericolliculus has this map of body space, and the motor output is not, you know, telling, it's not telling anything, any muscle to move or anything like that. It's basically
Right.
specifying a point in body space that we want to attend to.
Right.
And so it really divorces the motor behavior by putting it into this abstract space by which,
Right.
you know, it could be the desired, the tensional movement could be achieved by anyone.
Right.
So that was, again, it's sort of like thinking about,
I totally agree. Yeah.
It's
No,
not- yeah, it's not
I'm
really-
not
it's-
suggesting this is telling kind of a particular muscle fibers to twitch or something.
right. Yeah.
Basically, I'm just saying, yeah, it feels like this kind of forward causation and then the reverse model, like we also want to learn that at the level of a column. That's ultimately how columns are going to interface with subcortical systems. And it's still,
Right.
I believe,
So
a
we
causal
could-
one where it's like a column would probably observe that, okay, I projected to some subcortical structure, I did something, and I observed a particular behavior. So I can also achieve that behavior by projecting again.
So let's break this into two parts. I think we maybe we could agree that learning reverse causality is one problem. And then
Yeah.
once we know the reverse causality, how do we achieve the behavior we want is a separate problem. They're really not they seem to be isolatable. That's a term, I don't know.
Yeah.
So I don't think the issue you're dealing with this slide really is impacted by the proposal on the previous slide. Would you agree with that, or am I missing that?
I guess it just feels like a similar principle could apply, that one connection is predictive, one is driving. That was the connection, and
Yeah.
driven in
Okay.
particular by imagined states. That was the connection I was
Right.
trying to make.
Right. Okay.
But
So,
yeah.
so I'd like to comment on the previous slide if I could.
Yeah.
So, first of all, this issue of imagined states, it's always been lurking in the background. I worried about it 40 years ago. It's clearly imagined states are activity of neurons. There wouldn't be, if they're not activity of neurons, they're not a thing.
Right.
So there's activity, and yet somehow we're able to keep track of real reality versus imagination. And we've never dealt with that at all in our models. So I'm going to put that aside for the moment and say, yeah, I agree. We have to have some sort of abilities to do with like things you're predicting that haven't occurred yet. Even our predictive mechanism we outlined in the temporal memory, where the states are in a predictive state, they're depolarized.
Mm-hmm.
That is not the same. That is a type of prediction, but you wouldn't be aware of it.
Right.
Because
yeah, exactly. And I guess that was, I felt like maybe
right,
some of the discussion about imagination had focused on the apical
well,
and that's
right,
just why I thought I would bring this up.
okay, well, let's just put that aside for the moment. I want to just put that
Yeah.
in a little bucket on the side that says, hey, yeah, there is an issue there. By the way, in the temporal memory mechanism, I always felt that mechanism is still correct, but we're not aware of all the predictions we make. So that's the vast majority of them we're not aware of. So the mechanism we said there was, okay, this depolarization of cells is really happening. It works. But to say I'm imagining something and it's not actually happening, that's something different. So let's put that in the bucket aside. Now, what you're trying to do here, we're trying to learn, we have a mechanism for learning the forward causality, and we're trying to learn a mechanism in reverse causality. And I don't know if you picked it up, but in our discussions, maybe it was online, I don't remember, on Slack, but I had made a proposal. It's similar to what you're proposing here, but different. And I want to make sure that we talk about it in context of this picture, because there are two separate ways of achieving the same thing. What you're proposing here is there's two sets of connections. There's a forward connection and a backwards connection. And you're coming up with the rules by which those would work. But there's two separate physical connections, I guess. I don't know.
Right.
I proposed a situation where you didn't require a second set of connections. That there'd be the mechanism for learning forward causality would also work exactly the same going in reverse causality. I just want to make sure I state that mechanism again, so at least it's on the table.
Yeah.
Not that I'm 100% certain about it, but it has that appeal that it doesn't introduce any new mechanism or connections.
Right.
And that was the following: is that imagine behavior column 2 has the ability to say, you can call it an imagined state, but it's basically says, hey, the light is turning on, or I want the light to turn on. So I'm imagining the light turning on, or it's a desired, or it's a goal. It's something I want to happen, but it hasn't happened. But imagine that that's an internal state. So imagine the light has a behavioral state, says, oh, the light's turning on. And there's a representation for the light turning on. But internally, I know that, oh, the light really did turn on, or the light didn't turn on, just I want it to turn on. But what it sends out, a signal just like all the same causal signals everywhere else. So if I'm column 1 and I'm looking at the projections to layer 1, column 2 looks like it's saying the light is turning on. Even though the light isn't turning on, it's saying that. It's sending a signal out saying the light is turning on, because it wants it to turn on. But it's imagining it turning on. Internally, it knows, oh, it didn't turn on, but that's what I want. And then the switch goes on. So what would happen there? The switch would learn, hey, I follow the light turning on. When the light turned on, then my switch went up. There's a forward causality there. And what I could rephrase in saying, imagining the light turning on causes, makes associated with the switch going on. And so it doesn't require a different set of mechanisms. It just requires that I first learn the mechanism. I would first learn that the switch goes on, the light goes on. And then I've learned that. And now if I imagine the light going on, I can associate that with the switch going on. And so an imagination in column 2 would produce a causal effect in column 1.
I guess
it would say yes.
Right. So I mean, obviously I would prefer also just to have one connection if possible, but I guess two things I wanted to understand was, so in that case, it's going to L1. So in the absence of any other input, typically at least, that wouldn't be sufficient to drive this to become active.
Well,
so one thing I had suggested for that is that the basal input to the pyramidal neurons would be the current state. And if the current state is like, it learns current goal state combinations to then activate to get to the next state. So basically, it outputs an action whenever it is in the not desired state, and it gets the desired state as input to layer 1.
Yeah. So it's kind of
I didn't follow that. Do I need to
So
follow
basically,
that?
it learns a current state, goal state combination, and when those two appear in combination, it fires. And when it fires, that means take action X.
Okay, I'm not sure. I'm still not following 100%, but
I think
sure
that makes
even
sense.
necessary.
Yeah.
I'm not sure it's even necessary, is it? Can you park that idea for a moment, because I'm having trouble with it. Can just go back a half a second to something Niels said a moment ago, and just clarify something. When I throw the light switch, column 2 predicts the light switch is going to go on, but it doesn't make the light switch goes on. It goes into this imagined state. It's like I'm expecting it to go on, but it's not on. It doesn't force it. It doesn't make the light come on.
Yeah, sorry, you said when the switch flips.
The switch flips doesn't make the light. It doesn't.
Right.
Column 2
exactly. It's predictive.
Right. Column 2 says, "Oh, I'm expecting light one."
Right.
Same thing goes in the reverse direction. If I imagine the light goes on, it doesn't force the switch to go on. Column 1 says, "Oh, I'm imagining the switch going on." Right. And so it's not like you don't have to make the action occur.
But I guess I thought you agreed that imagined representations need to be like spiking. There needs to be some activity. It's not.
Well, right. But it doesn't mean that. My point is, imagine in all cases, all columns are going to have, we'll call it a desired state and a current state, something like that. I don't know. I don't know what the words to use for it right now. And so we have to have that in all cases. I'm just proposing that when you're commenting on this idea that the same connections would work when I said the same connections would work in reversal order, you said something which implied that
I guess it's just we need to drive this activity. We need to drive
what we need to drive is not the actual behavior, or we need to drive the expectation of behavior. So it'd be like this: I see the light, I want it to turn on, I imagine it, I'm really literally imagine it turning on. I'm looking at it and I can almost sense, oh, it's gonna turn bright. It's in my imagination. That then leads to an imagination on the light switch that the light switch should be going up. It isn't
Right.
up, but it should be going up. And so the that's the only point I want to make at this point in time. The same
Right.
connections, when they work, they work exactly the same forward and backwards. An activity in one column leads to an expectation of an action in one column leads to an expectation action in the other column.
I guess my other
in one case,
my other question, sorry,
yeah,
on that was
go
just
ahead.
about the temporal order, because again, like one of the important things is this kind of temporal ordering, that this precedes that.
Right.
And so I think the other thing I was trying to emphasize was some mechanism of capturing the reverse, which is that this precedes that. And so
but
this
it works in
connection,
either cases. If I just say the layer one synapses are, have this sort of causal time dependency to them,
yeah,
then they would be they would learn in both directions.
with it, but then that's just Hebbian learning. Then that's not causal.
No, it is. No, because one has to precede the other. So
Yes,
in the one
Maybe
case,
it would be causal in the sense that, like, if I'm in this state and then I get this goal, then I output that action, or I go to this next state in the sequence.
But then you have to have done it, right? You and observed it.
well,
Can
I
you
think
actually?
right.
Whereas
The way
we
the way
want to just be able to infer that.
the mechanism I'm proposing, Niels, means you first have to learn the forward causal state. It has to be learned. And I say, oh, the switch went up, the light went on. The switch went up, the light went on. I learned it. Then at that point, when I do that, I can imagine the light going up, and um, and then the switch goes up, and I say, oh, the imagination of the switch turning on is preceding the switch going up, and it worked. That's the order. I imagine the switch going on, and then I imagine imagine the light going on, then I see the switch go up, or I imagine the switch go up. And so the imagination of the light turning on always precedes the action of the switch. So you've learned the causal. It's action A precedes action B, but imagination B precedes action A or imagination A. So we haven't lost the causal direction. There is still maintained. There's nothing special required. And so I'm not following
No, that
everything
makes sense.
that you're all saying, but it felt like a single set of connections, a single mechanism would solve many, many problems. But it does require, and as you suggested too, it requires that columns know whether their internal state of the column says, I'm imagining this, or it's really happened.
Right.
Am I imagining the light going on, or does the light literally turn on? And so the reverse causality requires the imagining of the light coming on.
Right.
But I think it's simpler than the proposal of a separate connection to like we had it, and a lot simpler. But maybe I'm missing something. Maybe it wouldn't work. But for that reason, I prefer it because it's simpler. It's just one mechanism. It works in all cases, but it does require, as you require, it requires some idea that there's activity in a column that represents the action occurring, although the action hasn't occurred.
Right. And I guess it doesn't. It requires that you spend some time after learning the forward model, imagining and then acting. But I don't think that's unreasonable because, as we've talked about many times, kids.
Right. We've talked about that. You should do things that they look back and forth over and over again, turn on, turn off.
But no, that's helpful. Thanks. That's made it clear, because I think you did talk about that on Slack, but it wasn't clear when I was reading that how the reverse causality worked. But yeah, so if we say, like you say, somehow the imagining neurons are active, but internally represented somehow differently, and then yeah,
So
and then
this seems like a pretty big addition to columns. And I'm
right,
talking about this imagined state versus actual state. But as I pointed out a moment ago, I've known this had to exist for ages. So it's not like, oh, damn, we didn't think about this. It's more like, I guess now's the time to think about it.
yeah,
There's a lot of ways the neurons could do this. They could be firing at different phases to a cycle. So if they spike at one part of the phase, it's real. If work on another part of the phase, it's not real. They get a different spiking patterns, like a burst versus a non-burst, a regular spiking versus a burst spiking. There could be different sets of neurons involved. There could be the imagination neurons and the real neurons. I don't like that. It just doubles everything. But it could be. So I don't, over the years, nothing has popped into my head or nothing I read suggested to me an answer to this question. Like, well, how would this be implemented in neurons? I have no idea, actually.
right.
So from my
Just one.
perspective right now,
Oh yeah, sorry.
without any further neuroscience evidence, we would have to sort of treat it very abstractly and just say, okay, there must be a mechanism for doing this. And what does that mechanism have to do?
So yeah, just to check my understanding. So with the connection you were just describing, the kind of reverse one, once we've learned that, how do we correctly know that light going on doesn't predict switch going on?
It does in some sense. If I see the light go on my kitchen counter, I immediately say, who turned on the switch? I mean, it doesn't predict the switch will go on. It predicts the switch did go on, right? I mean, that's the fact. That's what happened. And we have this very particular item in our kitchen counter because I mentioned this the other day. The switch is on the side of the island, and you can easily bump into it with your hip if you're standing next to the island. And so it often happens that we're working around the island, so all of a sudden the light goes off, or the light goes on, and I immediately like, oh, let me go look at the switch. Who's there? That's what happened. So there is that direction. It doesn't mean that if the light goes on, I predict the switch will go up next. It does, but it does take me to the switch, and I assume that the switch had been moved. Maybe that didn't answer your question.
No, it did. I mean, I think that makes sense. I guess I'm just trying to think, is there anything that distinguishes the two directions? And if there isn't, then why
Well,
can't
I
you
guess
just
so.
associate
I mean,
them? Why do you even need a temporal?
well. Imagine we have these two states. We have the imagined state, imagined behavior, and the actual behavior. So going forward, I would want to associate the actual behavior with an actual behavior. Going backwards, I would associate an imagined behavior with an imagined behavior. Or I could associate an actual behavior, like the light turned on.
But wouldn't the difference be that in the forward direction, the causality causes, like if something happens, it causes a different state to be active in the other column versus in the inverse one? If something happens in one column or is imagined in one column, it causes the other column to activate some action output.
Well, no, I mean, if the light
A
turned
different
on,
goal
I don't want
state.
to throw the switch, right? If the light turned on, I know the switch was thrown,
Well,
or
I
I
mean, in
know.
the standard case of where you
The
actually
imagined.
then go to turn the light on because it's your
Okay, so
goal.
then say it again.
If you get the goal of the light being on, then the receiving column, its output or change in activation should be some kind of action command or another goal for a different column.
Actually, I think not. I actually think what should happen is it should start off imagining the switch turning on. That is, imagine the light goes on leads me to imagine the switch going on. And then I have the option of acting upon that. It's not automatic, right?
Okay, yeah, and then that happens in the layer 5. The layer 5 neurons
I'm not putting anywhere it's I don't know anywhere it's happening. Right. All I'm saying is the imagining the light goes on turns to imagine the switch goes on. By the way, you could follow this backwards. I might say, oh, imagining the switch goes on means I need to pick up the switch tool to turn the switch on, assuming like there's some special tool to turn the switch on.
And what stops you from doing it forwards? Again, if the connections are symmetric. So if you imagine the switch going on, why don't you then imagine that the light needs to go on and act based on that?
Well, just think of what it would be like. If I'm
I guess
looking
you
at the
would
switch,
imagine the light going on,
I
but
would
maybe you've just
imagine the
not
light going
learned.
on.
Right.
In fact, I think what I'd have to do is you'd have to attend. You would attend to the light and imagine it going on. I mean, you would somehow you have to invoke the model of the light, right? There's a model of the light and there's a model of the switch. And so what I'm doing is I'm invoking the switch model invokes the lamp model, and the lamp model can invoke the switch model. It's just the order in and I think you have these two models of two objects. It could be a chain of them, but let's stick to two. And they both have actions, and they both have imagined states and active states. Within that combination of those parameters, I'm hoping we can solve all problems. You know, some combination of those things can solve all problems. Like I can imagine the light go on, I can imagine the switch go on. I might activate the switch, and if I do activate the switch, then I imagine the light goes on. The light will turn on now. I could be basically saying go from the imagined light on to the actual light on. It should happen. If I look at the switch, I can imagine the switch turning on. Then I would say, oh, I can imagine the lamp turning on. But if I flip the switch, and then I say the lamp should turn on. I don't know. I'd have to work it through. But as a starting premise for today, it's possible that between those two states of imagined and real on two different objects, with the causal connections that can be learned between states and the two objects, that we could solve all the problems, and that at some point in time, a separate question is, when do we actually activate and do it? Right. I could imagine a series of events that I might do, but I don't want to do them.
Right.
Right. I can
And
imagine
it
turning the
feels
light
like
on,
partly that could be external. Like I could imagine part of that is the basal ganglia inhibiting motor outputs or something like that.
it
Like
could
maybe
be.
not all of that has to happen in cortex.
Right.
Um,
That's possible.
Or even the prefrontal cortex.
Right. But yeah, like prefrontal cortex recruiting basal ganglia to basically tell everyone like, don't do anything.
Yeah.
Well, imagine maybe this is related to it. When you're looking at something, you want to attend to some area. You can suppress the movement of the eyes, which normally your eyes would move to attend to that area, but you can suppress the movement of your eyes. So the question then would be like, well, where does that occur? Where does does the visual cortex send a signal to the superior colliculus, and the superior colliculus suppresses the movement of the eyes? That's your proposal. That's the equivalent of the basal ganglia. Or does the cortex itself say, no, attend to this space, but I'm not going to send a movement command to the superior colliculus?
Yeah, or kind of like a mix.
I'm just walking out. It's not just basal ganglia; it would also occur in vision.
Yeah.
So we can think about those.
Yeah, I feel like
examples.
it's ultimately cortex that's deciding, but maybe a different part
Right.
of
It is
cortex
ultimately
or
cortex
something.
deciding, right? Because it's I can say, Niels, given today's Wednesday, please don't move your eye. That's a pretty high
Make the
level
rest of the meeting difficult, but
model based behavioral command there.
right.
Well, this is
Well,
this
but
is
yeah, no, I'm
introduced-
happy to start with that premise,
Yeah.
like you say. Try and keep it simple, or like at least kind of with the connections.
The disappointing thing, maybe I don't know if disappointing is a strong word, is that it's like, we have one more thing we have to add to columns, this imagined states, and we haven't done that in the past, so it's like one more thing to do.
Right.
I want to keep getting to the bottom of columns, but we haven't done it yet.